I was supposed to be introduced by Jim Olson from the NTCA, but I guess he got lost or got caught up with something. So I'll do my own introduction. My name's Dale Kempster. I am representing the Tile, Trials and Marble Association of Canada. That's kind of almost my primary job, but I also do work for a company called Schluter Systems, which maybe most of you probably know. My worst nightmare happened last night. I was working on my presentation, had about 4 hours of changes I did, and tried to save it. And at 11:30 last night, I found that it went back to my original presentation, which it's okay, but it wasn't what I wanted for today because I was planning to do a North American perspective, and I will, but there's a lot of slides missing that I had added because of all the involvements that I'm in. I represent Canada for ANSI A108. I represent Canada for the NTCA Technical Committee. I am co-chair. I was chairman, but they won't let me do it anymore after 15 years. I chair the Canadian Mirror Committee for the ISO TC189. I am head of the 093,000 manual for Canada, which this presentation is largely based on, unfortunately, because it's going back to my original presentation. I did have a lot of the American equivalent there from the TCNA handbook, the ANSI books. So I'll ad-lib, I'll put some of those, I'll say it verbally. I'm going to talk to the coverings management and ask them that on the plane going back to Canada, I'm from Montreal, I will try and do all the changes I had, they're still in my mind, and have the right presentation online. So if you want to see I guess you would say the supporting documentation which I had, but now I've lost, it'll be on there. So I make my apologies. I was in IT for 3 hours this morning, top guys in my company, and we got a big IT department, and they couldn't find it. So I don't know what the heck happened, whether I got some type of virus or something that ate it up, I don't know. But anyways, your worst nightmare as a presenter, that your presentation goes to hell the last minute before your presentation. So this is the usual information. This seminar actually does qualify for continuing education points. So if there's any people that are looking to get those points, there's forms in the back that you can get and make sure that you get your points accordingly. It is sensitive. And that's, again, another stock picture you've probably seen many times from any of the seminars you've been to that are continuing education. So again, this is where I'm more from my Canadian presentation. So the Tile, Trials and Marble Association in Canada is kind of the equivalent of the NTCA and the TCAA and probably the CTDA combined. We're a small country. We only have 34 million people. So we have both suppliers and contractors. Contractors are about 50%, and then 50% is suppliers. And the reason why I did this presentation is that what we have is an inspection committee, which is incredibly, unfortunately, because really it means that there's a lot of problems out there, but incredibly, we have a lot of failures that we are called up to go inspect. We charge to go there. There's about 15 members at the moment. That changes every year. Most of them are a little older in age and seniority. And just to give you an idea, last year we did about 32 inspections, and it looks like that's going to increase and probably be well over 40 to almost 50 this year, the way things are going. Almost every single week I get one or two inspection reports sent. And how we do it is, even though you have one inspector who goes, the whole committee vets these reports. And it's almost like there's a race. Every one of our inspectors, there's about 3 of them especially, I think they wait for the reports to come in. And they literally, on a Sunday, a report comes in at 4 o'clock, and by 7 o'clock, they've got a page of questions, references, you know, things of that nature. So when you get an inspection in Canada, you're actually getting a huge amount of knowledge and experience to go over it. So even though if the inspector missed something, don't worry, they'll find it. They'll make them go back to go check on it if need be. So a lot of the failures I'm going to be talking about is from our experience with our inspection committee. So this is our 093,000 manual. It's just like the Tile Council handbook, a lot thinner. a little bit easier to work with. But we do just like the TCNAs, we modify the methodology, or revise it, I should say, and add and maybe delete in some cases, depending on what the methodology is and what have you, every 2 years. So very similar to what the TCNA does as well. We have what we call the Tile Installer Technical Handbook. And I'm missing the slide, but I had the equivalent for the NTCA. The NTCA reference manual is basically identical. What we did was we made an agreement with the NTCA that we would take their handbook, the reference manual, and we would revise it and make it Canadian and add some content for the Canadian audience. But they're very similar. And so that's why this presentation still works quite well, because I'll be calling some references to this handbook, and it's the equivalent in the US. The big difference for us is, of course, everything's metric, and our building codes are a little different. I'll kind of cite out a few things there as we're going along. We do use ANSI, just like you do in the United States. There is an exception. So these are the normal books that most of you, if you work with specifications, are using. But what we also do in Canada that's a little different is that we don't make any tile. There's only one tile manufacturer in Canada, in Vancouver, that makes glass tile. There was a couple other ones that were owned by some pretty large companies, and because we don't have a lot of clay, the raw materials sourcing, that's typically where you make your tile, or if you make thin set, you're near a quarry for sand. The reality was that the only tile we really get is from importing, and a lot of it's coming from Europe, some from the United States, but most of it's from Europe. So what we did about 3 years or 4 years ago is we adopted the ISO standards for tile in Canada. We don't reference ANSI. We are probably going to do the same for mortars and grouts in the next revision, which is next year, because the ISO standards for mortar and grouts are becoming more and more prevalent, and because we're an international company, we decided, and also because the TTMAC is made up of a lot of these same international companies, we decided that we're going to slowly transition. Not that we won't recognize ANSI, but ISO would be our preliminary, and then ANSI would be the secondary. So I did change this for today. Before it was a Canadian perspective. But this is the North American perspective, and I travel all over, not for the last year and a half, but I've been, throughout the United States. I've probably been about everywhere you can go, except for maybe Fargo, because that's just too damn far to go. But the reality is, I've traveled because of my company, and I've been with our company 34 years throughout the United States and Canada, and I go to Europe. Before the COVID virus, I was there about every 2 months to my head office. So I've seen a lot of job sites there as well. So these are the top 10 failures. And again, this is a little off because I did modify it for a couple of other failures that I had added, but unfortunately I just didn't have time playing with photos and that within 20 minutes before coming here. Didn't make sense. And these are not necessarily in order, because depends. Sometimes in some part of the one part of the year or geographical region, we will have this type of failure happen more so than in another area. So these are the top 10. There's probably I actually was up to 12 on my new presentation, but I'll keep it to 10 right now. And I think they're actually not, the last couple are not in proper order. So this is one of the ones that we see a lot, and that's lack of coverage. There's a lot of installers out there that still aren't following the recommendations of the NTCA or the 093,000 manual, where they're combing the mortar still in swirls. They're not back buttering. They're not placing the tile down perpendicular to the notches of the trowel and moving it back and forth slowly to push the air out and get in proper contact. And if you do that properly, in many cases, especially if you have a relatively flat back of a tile, it eliminates back buttering. But this is something we see a lot. The first thing our guys do when they go in for an inspection is they'll take, a knife or whatever, something metal, and start tapping it. Some guys like to use a golf ball. And determine, what type of coverage they got. And you can tell pretty quickly, what type of coverage you have. And coverage is really important. I mean, we basically say interior 80%, and then if you're doing exterior, 95 to 100%. And I tell you, you better try and keep it to that 100% if you want to have an installation that's going to have any possibility of having some life cycle. This thing is sure sensitive. Huh, okay. So there, I've already kind of jumped through that, and this is from the TT-MAC manual on proper tiling techniques. Again, the equivalent you'll find in TCNA handbook. You'll find the equivalent referred to in the the NTCA reference manual. But even though this is real basic stuff, guys, we see it all the time. It's really surprising how common it is. This is another one I just don't get. And I've had guys tell me, I've been doing this for 25 years. It's always 25 years. I don't know why. But I've been doing this for 25 years. Never had a problem. Spot bonding. It is on fire in Canada. I know it's pretty common in the United States. I know that Bart from the NTCA has said that they get calls all the time. It really is, a really questionable installation. Typically they're using just traditional regular mortar. They may not be using what we call the large and heavy tile mortar, which at least would have a half decent chance because it's made to go thick and won't have shrinkage aspects. But most of the guys are just using regular thin set. They'll be using a 118.4 or a 118.11 or 15 maybe. And even if 15 well, that's part of the large and heavy tile mortar. A 15 mortar still doesn't allow you to do this. But if you look at that, first of all, hollow sounding. Second, you're going to have a reduction in load bearing capability. 3, if you're in a wet area, shower area or whatever, or even worse outside, which I do have some photos, or do I can't. The new one I had photos of outside where spot bonding was used. Where's the water going to go? It's just going to sit there and accumulate. Then you're going to have gray water, black water, mold growing, what have you. It's just really terrible way to install tile, and we see it time and time again. Oops. This was really scary. This was a school, and we literally end up taping off the outer area where this was done because those tiles, if you hit them hard enough, were falling off. So imagine if you had, this is like an elementary school. One of those tiles probably could kill a small child. So really, just ridiculous to see this being done. Now you might say, well, where does this come from? And at least in Canada, and this is the same in the National Stone Institute manual, there is a method of spot bonding for hanging stone. And what they do, though, is they use pig wire, and they have mechanical fasteners on the back of that stone, and then they'll have the spot bonding behind there. So they're not relying on that spot bonding really to hold it up. It's really there to just make things uniform and even, and something that gives it a little bit of support when they attach it to the wall. So this is where we're thinking that this is probably coming from, but it really is an installation that's basically going to be a disaster. And again, we call this out in the 093,000 manual. If you go to the NTCA reference manual, they've got a whole section on it, 2 pages, as we do in our equivalent manual with the Tile Contractor's Handbook. And it really is something that we strongly recommend that you do not participate in for an installation. Poor workmanship. What's wrong with this picture? That's a waterproof membrane behind there. And this gentleman actually sent this photo in saying, look at this, I found a great way to hang tile on a wall using nails. So obviously, this is not recommended by anybody. And obviously, poor workmanship to the worst extent. And one of the things that we do, and there's other references I had on here before, I lost my presentation, but in our 093,000 manual, we actually have a master spec in the back that is done by Keith Robinson. He is one of the top spec writers in North America. He not only has won awards in Canada, but he also wins awards down in the US. And there's a lot of architectural offices that will actually follow his formats in his master specs for whatever division. But anyways, there, it calls out about, the installation and the execution and, the guidelines that they should be watching and making sure. It's something, again, every manual in the US, like the NTCA reference manual and the TCNA handbook, have areas where they give you the guidelines. ANSI A108 as well in the beginning for general tells you all these requirements to do a proper installation. No movement joints. Whoops. This, and unfortunately I had a couple more slides that showed it from a wider view, but this was pretty amazing. This was a church in Quebec City, and they decided they wanted to clean it up, the floor and that, and they had all the pews on top of the floor, and when they moved the pews away, the floor literally just erupted, like you see here. It's like waves of tile that popped up. And what they basically figured out was that the pews were holding the tile down, and once they moved it out, I mean, this is a phenomenon too sometimes you'll see with pools when they take the water out, if they do it too fast, and if they don't got proper movement joints, you can watch your tile erupt. But movement joints are something that's unfortunately considered to be almost a necessary evil, and you have a lot of architects that, try to use them as minimal as possible, or they'll try and make them as thin as possible, say only an 1/8 inch in width, which, unless you're doing a super high frequency, like maybe every 8 feet, chances are that's not going to be enough. You're going to have too much movement. And this is an older tile, but think about today. What's most common now is large format tile. When I did my house, I put a 13 by 13 tile in there about probably 15 years ago, maybe even longer. 20. And I had people coming in and go, oh my God, I can't believe how big that tile is. Where'd you get that? 13 by 13. I mean, now, the most smallest tile you're probably dealing with today, well, and then if you look at the trench seminars I went to the other day, they say the smaller format is coming back, but, most of the time what we're seeing is, 24 by 24, maybe 12 by 24, 48 by 48, and then of course you got gauge porcelains coming in, which, originally were like 1 meter by 3 meters, so 3 foot 3 inches by almost 10 feet. And now they're even bigger than that. Now, you got way less grout joints. So if you've got less grout joints, you've got basically a sheet of glass sitting on that floor when you grout it in. You got to have designated weak points in that floor to allow for the thermal expansion, contraction, changes in humidity, especially say you're on a wood floor. The wood, is hygroscopic. It wants to absorb and release moisture, so it's going to expand and contract during seasonal changes. Hopefully you use some type of membrane underneath, like an uncoupling membrane, but still, it doesn't eliminate the need to have movement joints. And so in both Canada and the US, we have specific details in our manual. Now, we don't have Wi-Fi here. You might want to just look at this. You could probably find it pretty easily. Just say on Facebook, tile popping or tile tenting. And if I was able to play this video, they actually have video that people were able to witness where the tiles just looks perfect, and all of a sudden the tile just starts popping off the floor. It almost looks like it's fake, because you can't believe that's really happening. But there's actual people who have been able to catch that on video, and it's pretty entertaining to look at that and see, and again, that may not be all 100% because of lack of movement joints. Lack of coverage is probably a big issue too. There may be bond breakers on the back of the tile too that wouldn't allow for a decent bond. There's all those other aspects too that need to be taken into consideration. And when we do an inspection, we are able to see that and we'll report it as such. But the 093,000 manual, and then the TCNA handbook. And the TCNA handbook has actually evolved quite a bit. They've added quite a bit more information there. I didn't realize how much it changed till I went to the latest edition for 2021. So now I'm going to have to go and revise ours to make it so looks like we're, keeping abreast of the new information that is out there, which Tile Council is now citing. So you have the equivalent in the U.S. The distancings are similar. Basically, you're looking at interior without sunlight. We can go up to about 16 feet in Canada. If it's interior with a lot of sunlight, we recommend to go no more than 8 feet. And then in exterior applications, same thing, a very conservative 8 to 12 feet max typically for allowance of those high fluctuations in temperature. One thing we added, and this is actually out of ANSI, A108. In Canada, we added the fact that you can now do nonlinear movement joints. We realize the only way you're going to do that is with a sealant, and you have to make sure the manufacturer does recommend that their sealant can be used in such a configuration, because you're going to have multiple stresses in different directions going on. But this has actually been a nice addition, because this is where we can sometimes get the architect to specify the movement joint, because they're not breaking up the tile field. They can do their basket weave, their herringbone, what have you, and get the sealant so if they blend it in properly, the color of caulking matches the grout so that it's not so visible to the eye. Whereas if they have to cut it, then obviously it now ruins the pattern. So we do recognize it now in Canada because of ANSI. And that was a study that was done by Tile Council. At first, Tile Council said, no way. They said, there's no way you can do this. It's impossible. And then we had a consultant that said, no, I've done it. I've tested it, and it does work. I've got sealant manufacturers that say it's good. And TCNA did some testing over a couple-year period and came back and said, you know what? We apologize. You're right. It does work. So this is kind of a nice addition. It helps us for these issues where the architects don't want to or are reluctant to specify. I'm sorry, does it increase? No, not really. It's, I mean, I would expect that they're probably going to want to match the grout joint width. But if they go really tight with their grout joint, then they're probably going to have to go wider. I mean, typically, 3/16 of an inch is typically the minimal thickness. I've seen 1/8 inch sealant joints. I've got malls near my house. I live in Canada, in Montreal, and they don't work. I'm telling you, it's just too small. Maybe if they did a higher frequency, but they don't. They'll still try and do, say, 16 to 24 feet, because it's closed in, no sunlight and all that, with a 1/8 inch sealant joint. And I've got a mall near my house where the tiles is lifting in different areas. You walk on it, you can hear it, it's hollow, because it's breaking away, it's debonding from the substrate. So, inappropriate material used. This is Indian slate. Probably never seen a freeze-thaw cycle in its life till it came to Northern Ontario, where this photo is. And literally the slate was coming clean. You can see, obviously, improper troweling, I wouldn't say technique, because the mortar is in one direction, but they certainly didn't engage the mortar. It's not been flattened out. You want that mortar to be flat on the substrate and also on the back of the tile. So that didn't help. I'm sure water was getting underneath, freezing, and causing the slate to literally explode almost off the floor. Same photo. Now, again, notice the water collection. They got negative slope. So, I mean, you talk about, shooting yourself in the foot. They did about everything wrong so that this thing would be a disaster. This is bluestone. Bluestone's extremely water absorptive. And this is in Vancouver, on the coast, right on the beach, near English Bay, if you know Vancouver. And you get, every time it rains, you get this halo effect where it's dark, well, depending on what time of, where it is in its drying period. But, you know, the customer was really upset with this because they had bought this gorgeous stone, expecting it to look uniform and beautiful, and then every time it rains, you know, and they did try putting some sealers in and that, it just, you know, it just doesn't work. And they had this halo effect going on. One of the things that they could have done differently was to put a drain mat underneath, because this was a mortar bed that they used underneath it. So at least when the water got in, it could easily then evacuate from the area with, again, a good proper slope, 2% off to the outer edge of the balcony. But, you know, really not probably the best material for a wet environment like Vancouver. I mean, you know, my father always joked in Vancouver, because that's where he lives still, is that they have the Vancouver Rain Fest, starts in January 1st and ends in December 31st. So we get a lot of rain there. But the reality is, if you walk the show, I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable what they can do with porcelain today. You know, with the 3D, they can do it with the ink, but now they're doing it with the glaze. And to use a natural stone outside, and I hope Chuck's not here from the National Stone Institute, but to me, I think I would be using a porcelain outside that looks like stone if that's what you want, but God, you're gonna have none of these issues. You know, still have to install it properly, but to have your expensive stone like this being really not giving you the appearance that you're looking for, it's just not worth the expense or the anguish. So what we do have, and this is kind of reminiscent to the NTCA reference manual, and I think TCNA handbook also has a section on this. Their book is so big, it's tough to keep up with it. But there's a listing of, you know, unsuitable substrates, which hopefully most of this is pretty obvious to you. And then we got some of these questionable substrates. And really, when the questionable substrates come up, this is where you really need to talk to your manufacturer, you know, talk to the installation materials representatives and find out what they recommend for these type of situations. Because they probably have a solution. And if they don't, then maybe you should think about not going over top of that substrate. But, you know, you can see that the list is pretty big. Another big one is lippage. I mean, this is terrible. I mean, you catch your toe on this. You got a tripping hazard with this installation. I mean, you can see they're using, was it pennies? Pennies, or I can't quite make it out. But anyways, you know, they got 2, almost 3, I think it's pennies, to just show you how much lippage that was going on in here. There you go. I mean, if that was on a wall and you want that kind of look, I mean, some of the new trends they got up there right now is kind of reminiscent of this. This is a floor. You know, and notice what they got going on there too. Is that a 1/3 offset? I mean, it's, well, I mean, if you look at it, it's inconsistent, but, you know, some of those joints are right in the middle of the next tile. If you look at the third one up, I mean, it's almost right in the middle. So, I mean, of course, the lippage, you know, is going to be really excessive. You know, especially with these, you know, rectangular type tiles, you really want to do the 1/3 offset, which is recommended by NTCA, TCNA, 093,000 manual in Canada. Yeah, this is actually not a residence. This is a commercial installation, if you can believe it. So again, you have your guidelines that are reflective of what the maximum amount of tolerance in the facial dimensions of the tile itself and what's allowed, and then you combine that to come out with what is your allowable lippage, also based on your joint width. But this is, we're the same as, this is out of my, the 093,000 manual, but this is pulled out of ANSI and is also shown in the TCNA handbook as well. Man, this thing's sensitive. Exterior applications. This is probably one of the most demanding installations that we see. And one of the other failures that I had added, but is not here, of course, was steam rooms. I think steam rooms are probably even more demanding than an exterior application, especially a commercial steam room that's used in say at a country club or a gym or whatever, which is used 24/7 in most cases. But exterior applications definitely are demanding, and this is actually a house on one of the islands just off the coast of Vancouver, and the efflorescence was just absolutely horrific, and to the point where they come in every year with a pressure washer to try and wash the efflorescence off. And the good news is eventually, usually, it's not going to continue forever. There's only a certain amount of soluble salts. That's what efflorescence is. It's not dog urine, it's not cigarette butts. I've had people tell me that. Oh yeah, it's caused by this. It's soluble salts, the Portland cements, washing out because the mortar underneath is being exposed to moisture. And if you don't tent off or hoard your installation and make sure that mortar has a chance to set up, that's really the key to try and prevent efflorescence. And I can tell you, there's some mortar manufacturers out there that do claim that they have efflorescence-free mortars. If everything's perfect, maybe, but I've used some of their products and it still had some efflorescence. Now, nothing like this, but if you don't hoard it and let it fully cure, you're going to get, where the additives within that mortar, because most people are using a modified mortar outside, haven't had a chance to coalesce completely, you're going to get this type of occurrence because it's not locked in. This is underneath. Actually, I jumped further. This is from underneath, looking from the ground. This is actually a politician's house just off Vancouver Island. You can see it's going onto the glass. The glass was being etched. This is in Florida. Stalactites. Same thing. They go in and have to use a power washer to clean that off. This is disgusting. This again is another shot off of Vancouver Island, or one of the I think the islands in the Gulf Coast, and absolutely a mess. And they obviously had to just tear it out and redo it. Latex too. That's another issue. Again, if the installation wasn't done properly and given proper time to cure and hoarded, so that you're not getting direct sunlight. What was interesting with this is a deck actually in Wisconsin that I went to go see, and the sun would come out, and you get this bubbling of foam coming out through the grout joints, and then when the sun went past, it would stop, and you clean it off, and it didn't look too bad. But what it was this was actually the latex coming up through with the steam coming from the sun hitting the tile and creating latex leaching. Again, it's not going to go forever. Eventually, the supply is going to become less and less. But you're probably going to find, too, that the mortar's getting weaker and weaker, and you're probably going to have your tile starting to debond. This is a house in Whistler. And again, you see a common theme here. Everything's from Canada. Again, I'm sorry. I did have American slides from other jobs that be closer to reference for you. But this was a job in Whistler, a multi-million-dollar chalet. And this guy was putting flagstone down, the installer, and he was German trained, really meticulous installer. And when he came to install, they said, well, we're not going to drop this balcony, because he wanted to drop it down so he could flash up and go underneath the logs. There's logs on either side of the doorway here. And then the threshold was flush to the French doors. And they said, don't worry, we have a maintenance guy who's here. So whenever it snows, he comes and shovels everything away. He's got squeegees, so he pushes everything away. So we don't have any issues. Don't worry, we don't need to worry about the flashing. And there was practically no slope to this deck as well. So water started infiltrating, and you can see that kind of black-looking residue on the backside is because they have concrete board on top of the wood there, and to cover up where the gaps were so you couldn't see the concrete board, they thought, oh, you know what, let's put tar paper down. So that is residue from the tar paper getting wet and starting to break down. And if I was to go a little bit forward, there's a beautiful patio set and a spa, and it's all stained from the residue coming through. And so what we did is we got called in to help this contractor and went to take a look at it, and we said, well, let's find out where the leak is. So we did one in the middle, and the middle worked out okay. We sandbagged it, filled it up with water, gave it 24 hours, nothing happened. Then we sandbagged against the wall, and the water literally just flew through and was coming down because he had nowhere to flash the waterproofing up underneath the logging on the skirting on the balcony. So this is, I actually chaired this committee, and this is in both the Canadian and the American, the NTCA reference manual. It's about 3 pages long on the guidelines of doing exterior applications. And we consider it almost like a checklist. And if you're going to do an exterior application, check off everything that's in there that you are able to do, that you're going to be able to do this. Because if you skip and you think you can get away with, okay, well, I'm not going to do a 2%, I'm going to do less than that, or I'm not going to flash up the walls just like the previous installation, I guarantee you, you're going to have a failure, and it's going to be catastrophic. Decks, when they fail, they're not cheap. I'm telling you, you're going to be looking at literally tens of thousands of dollars. Where my other cap, working from Schluter, we're not perfect. We've had some installation failures exterior. One that comes to mind was over $65,000. I even paid to have the house cleaned inside because of all the debris when they went back and redid the deck. And that's not even, when I say the minimum, or I should say max. We've got installation failures that we've seen in Europe that were hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this is really a great guideline to follow, and definitely marry with a manufacturer that warranties their products for exterior applications, and hopefully we'll even send one of their representatives to come see you while you're doing the install. Make sure that you're not missing anything by chance. Making sure everything is good, because it really, for the amount of expense that you're spending for an exterior application, you don't want to have a callback. It's gonna cost a fortune, and it's just not good for the tile industry as well, because everybody's going to complain. Bad news likes to travel, and every neighbor's going to know about it. Every cousin, every uncle that comes over is going to know about it. So we really recommend that you take a really close look if you're going to do an exterior application, follow these guidelines. And of course, there is details in the handbook. In Canada, it's detail F325 ED for exterior decks. And we've got about 5 different generic details that identify different methodologies for trying to do an exterior application. Oops. Now, this one here is pretty interesting. Thankfully, you can see there's really no neighbors close by, but they decided to put gauge porcelain on the exterior of this house. I mean, it's pretty ugly, but anyways, they wanted to put gauge porcelain up on this installation. First of all, they went over a wood backing. And if you go into any of the manuals, they'll tell you, I mean, you can still have wood backing, but you got to build out from there. You know, you fur it and you put the backer boards, like concrete board down, or maybe you're going to use mortar, what have you, wire lath and mortar on top, and have a cleavage membrane slash waterproof membrane on the back. But anyways, this installation was just an absolute total disaster. You can see look at the troweling techniques. Now, here's the funny thing. The contractors did this job, said they went to school, went to one of the different tile manufacturers. You know, there's a couple out there that are doing training where you can go or go to a local distributor that sells that product, and they'll do like a 1 or 2 day program teaching you how to install gauge porcelain. And I think most of you know it's a totally different animal. It's not like tile. I mean, just everything, the troweling techniques, the equipment that you use to cut it, to transport it. You know, I did my own project recently, a couple years ago, doing the walkway in front of our offices with gauge porcelain, 1 meter by 3 meter. And what an enlightening that was, because it bought all the equipment to do it, and it was not easy. It was a big installation, and we probably took to do, I guess it was probably about 600 square feet. It took us over a week to get it all installed. And we hoarded it, we had tenting, the whole works. But this tile installation, look, you can see they got troweling going in one direction and then the other direction. Doesn't look like they put any mortar on the back. You know, if you notice, and I do have a slide here, I'm not quite sure of the sequence here. Yeah, there you go. This is what they should have had. I mean, that's your first step, is you go in and you trowel out your mortar, you notch it on the backside of the gauge porcelain, and again, excuse me, you know, you've got all this information now, and you do now have 2 standards that have come out for installing these large format tile. But they obviously didn't do that. And then what you do is you do the same on the substrate. You comb out your mortar. And then when you combine the two, it creates like what they call a zipper lock. So the mortar locks itself in, and you got 100% coverage, which outside you know for sure want to have. And you are making sure that that tile is not coming off. It's going to be staying there. So this is how we report these installations. And so this was the conclusion on the report that we did on this failure. And this is just a part of it. There is a whole combination of other things that we added to that were wrong. But again, just saying that, you know, we don't recognize using wood as a suitable substrate for an exterior application. You know, even interior applications, you know, there's specific requirements if you want to go directly over the wood, you know, typically double layer, and there's other systems out there that eliminate having to use that second layer of plywood if you're doing interior, but exterior we don't recommend it. So new for 2020 is a standard that follows actually the one in 2017, which was for interior applications. But this standard now is available. You can purchase it online through Tile Council, tileusa.com. That's how I got mine. But definitely follow the installation guidelines that are cited here. Otherwise, you're definitely going to get yourself probably into trouble. And that's the predecessor, 108.19 for interior. And this kind of leads me to a little concern that we have, is that 108.19 recognizes going over wood substrates for interior. In Canada, we actually don't. We think that there needs to be more testing, more R&D done, because what it really comes down to is, and I sit on the different committees, when they tested for these gauge porcelains, what they did was they used one of the, it's not the only thing, but they used what they call the Robinson floor test. Most of you probably, hopefully have heard this. This is the ASTM C627. This is, I think, Tile Council's. It could be maybe somebody else's, but it looks like Tile Council's. And again, my presentation I was planning to bring had one showing wood, and I just last minute so I could find, but when they do a wood substrate on a Robinson floor tester like this, what they do is they take 2x2s, put them on 16-inch on center, they screw in a 1/4-inch piece of plywood underneath, and then on top they'll use, in the United States, which is a little different from Canada, they'll put down 3/4-inch, 20 millimeter thick subfloor. In Canada, we actually do 5/8, 15 millimeter. And this is kind of the reason why we didn't adopt the recognition of using gauge porcelain on wood for interiors. And it's put onto a concrete pad, so it's fully supported. And so when they run the Robinson, so if you notice, and I hope I'm not being repetitious or redundant, but when you do the Robinson floor test, you got 3 wheels. You start off with soft rubber wheels, and then you start off with 300 pounds for 1 cycle. You go 900 times around. It takes 1 hour. If you don't see any cracked grout or any cracked tiles or chipped tile or powdering or popping grout, you pass that cycle. And so it's a destructive test, and you keep on going. So the first 3 cycles, so it's 300 pounds, then it goes to 600 pounds, 900 revolutions, 900 pounds, 3rd cycle, you get a residential rating. And then if you go higher, 4th one, you repeat the 300 pounds with soft rubber wheels, and then you go to hard plastic, and then I'm sorry, it's 900 pounds. Then you go back down to 300 pounds with hard plastic, and you build up from there. And I won't go, it goes to 14 cycles. And when you get to like cycle 9, it's steel wheels. Now for residential, typically you need to get at least 3 cycles. And when they did the gauge porcelain, what they did was they cut it into 4 tile and condensed it down to this 4 foot by 4 foot pad, but on wood and in the same assembly as I mentioned. Well, you're really only testing one thing. You're just testing the bending moment of the substrate, the subfloor, I should say. You're not getting the joists doing this. You're not getting the joists bending and deflecting. You're not getting vibrations. So you've got kind of the best situation. And the biggest weakness for these, and I've talked to some of the different manufacturers that were part of the testing for this, and they always said the biggest issue was the joints for the tile, these large gauge porcelains. And they said if there's any movement there, deflection, and the edge is a little bit exposed, they chip and then they just start breaking down. And just think about it. I mean, these tiles, gauge porcelain, are about 5 millimeter to 5. No, they go a little bit thicker, 6 millimeter. But there's 5 millimeter, and there's some even 3 millimeter, which still to this day we're only recommending for walls. But the reality is, if you've got a bending deflective floor, and this is our universal floor tester that we use up in Canada, because we are able to go from the top down, this gives us a chance to be able to build up to 40 inches of construction height. We suspend the floor on pony walls. This is about 14.7 by building code without having to add blocking or cross bridging. You can go up to 14.7 in Canada. I think in the United States it's similar. And we run the Robinson on top there, and we get full deflection of the dimensional lumber in this case, but we can, of course, put trusses in, we can put I-beams in, things of that nature. And we really actually emulate what you're going to see in a real true life situation. Now, the reason I bring this up, I sit on the ASTM C21, which governs the Robinson floor test, governs a lot of other things for the tile industry. And I've been asked to make a proposal on creating a new test method similar to what you're seeing here, so that we probably will, within a couple of years, come out with a new test method for doing installations over wood that emulate more the true situation that you're getting in a real life condition. So until we get that R&D done, in Canada, we don't recognize it. And I've had one of the manufacturers of the gauge porcelain, who's based out of Toronto, but originally from Italy, come to me and say, listen, you got to change this. And I said, look, help me. Give me some money. And I'm wearing my TTMAC hat, and pay for some of this testing. So anyways, he never came through, but I'm going forward with it anyways. I'm allowed 3 tests a year for R&D purposes paid by our association. So in the next month or so, I'm about to start doing my first suspended floor testing with gauge porcelain, which then will be the kickoff to start the work on doing a new test method with ASTM C21. Optical hazing is probably not as prevalent as it was, especially China pretty well has almost been eliminated from the United States because of the duties that have been now applied to them. Okay, a little bit of time here, I'm working off okay. But optical hazing is really something that unfortunately doesn't get caught very easily. What it is when they're polishing the tile, the porcelain, the way they polish it, the grinders can leave kind of a marking on the tile, and once it's been brought out and installed, if you got sunlight coming in from the side, all of a sudden you see it. You see the haze. I mean, this picture is probably not really good. Let's see if this one. Yeah, there you can see the hazing. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. You can try and go in and try and grind it, I guess. I did have somebody who said they did it. It was an absolute disaster, so they end up having to tear the floor out. But really, optical hazing is still out there, and we've seen it in Canada. We've had probably about 3 or 4 failures. Or I guess you really can't call it a failure. It's really an optical issue. But of course, the people weren't happy with it, and they wanted it torn out. So the optical hazing, really what it leads itself to is, and again, the TCNA, the NTCA reference manual talks about sampling, and really something like this, you know, even if it's in a showroom, they should be doing a large area with it and having natural sunlight come in so you can see it, because if you do it with artificial light, it doesn't come out that easily. So sampling is something that's kind of gone away a little bit, but we're really pushing. And now with the way they're doing the new technology with 3D printing on ink and now the glaze, you definitely want to do sampling to see what you really are purchasing and what you're going to see when you actually get it installed. So, I don't know why it doesn't want to stay. Okay. And so this is the universal floor tester, which is a little different from the older version that you saw, the Robinson floor test that the Tile Council has, and it is driven down from on top, and so that way we're able to do various heights of construction and run the test accordingly. One of the other ones I didn't have, I had and I lost, that I wanted to bring up and just mention is what we call Frankenstein installations. And what I mean by Frankenstein installations, and I had some really nice shots showing, we see a lot in showers, where they combine different manufacturers' products together. They'll use say a prefabricated shower pan from one manufacturer and then maybe band it up 6 inches, and then the rest of the wall they switch and they put somebody's trowel plied membrane on, or maybe they got backer board, you know, being used. Well, think about it. A backer board, you always hang a sheet of polyethylene behind it so that when the water gets through, which backer board, you know, it's not waterproof, it's just water resistant. Moisture does get through it. That water hits the polyethylene sheet, comes down, it's locked in. There's nowhere for it to go because you've got banding going up and it's now, you know, basically on the plate in your wall, and you got yourself basically a disaster waiting to happen. You're probably going to have black water, and then you're going to have mold, and it's just going to be terrible. But what I wanted to bring out or mention was that those type of installations, I got a big contractor that I'm friends with, and he said, look, I like to spread the wealth. I didn't want to give everything to everybody. I said, yeah, but what are you going to do when it fails? Who are you going to point your finger at? I said, you know, you go to the manufacturer of the trays, well, they're going to say, well, how do we know it's not the trowel plied membrane that's causing the failure, or the backer board is the culprit and all that. I said, you're just going to have a shooting match going on, and you're going to be stuck probably with the bill. And so, you know, we do have, and I do cite it in the NTCA reference manual, there's reference to it, is that make sure that if you're going to go with different manufacturers' products, one, that they're compatible, and two, what the warranty is. And make sure that warranty is not just, you know, the value of the piece of paper it's written on, that they actually have some depth in there. There's warranties out there that basically just say, we'll replace the materials. Well, that's nothing. And a lot of times it's based on the original cost from when you did the install. You want a warranty that has labor and materials in there, because what's your biggest cost? It's going to probably be your labor, tearing it out and putting it back in. So be really careful with that. I had some really beautiful shots of some really Frankenstein or whatever you want to call it, installations. And in reality, hopefully people are going to start going further away from that. Typically, you're not going to get a single source warranty, obviously, if you go that route. And even though you may save a few bucks, it's really not worth it to take that route. So, as you can see, I'm on my last slide. My original presentation had a few more. But anyways, I think we've got a few minutes, 4 minutes. Is there any questions? What I'm going to do is, with the management for coverings, I'm going to update this presentation. Really makes me upset that I wasn't able to show it to you, because I did put about 4 hours and some new slides in and some new photos and a lot more of the American referencing. I apologize. A lot of this was Canadian because it was a Canadian presentation originally. But rest assured, a lot of it is very similar, and we do have a lot of parallels between our countries, and we love working together with our different industry associations. And our goal, as it should be, is to try and keep these installation failures from happening. If you work with the guides, I'd recommend that and I know it's some cases really difficult. The TCNA handbook is the yellow pages. You can get it all digital. I got everything, all the different ANSI specs and the manuals in digital form. And then in my office, I got the hard copies, but the digital forms are definitely a lot easier to carry around. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, especially on a Friday where a lot of people are usually on their way home. I'm about to run to the airport and try and catch a plane if I'm allowed on. If they recognize my COVID test I did yesterday. It was negative, by the way. All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.